Is it okay if you talk into this? So
Oh,
otherwise,
do
you
you
know,
want me to use a microphone?
yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm not used to using a
We can
microphone.
just talk into this if you want.
Okay, just like hold it and.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi. Are you? Oh, okay. Testing. I don't know. Can anybody hear this? Is this working?
Well, it's going into the computer.
Oh, okay. Cool. All right. Is that working for you?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Hit the big time. I have a microphone. Okay, so like I said, Elizabeth Bathory, the Blood Countess, our last historical figure. Her story is the stuff of myth and legend. So it's really interesting to me that we are going to talk about her story pretty much like in the 17th century when it just seems like such an ancient story. But we'll get there in the end. Okay, so first off, we're going to talk about Vlad the Impaler. And he is actually, so his real name is Vlad the Third, and he was known during his lifetime and after his lifetime as the Impaler. He lived from 1430 to 1477, and he actually had people impaled, so he lives up to his name. But what's in a name for Vlad the Third? So he goes by a number of names. First one again is Vlad the Third, and that's because he is the son of Vlad the Second. We're not really sure what the deal is with Vlad the First. I couldn't find any information about Vlad the First, but I do know that Vlad the Second's father was this name right here, I'm just going to say Mercia or Mercia. He was a prince in the Middle Kingdoms in this area of Wallachia. Again, I'll have another map to show you, but that was his name. I wanted you guys to see it. Mircea, the first. Um, that was Vlad the Second's father. So I don't know where Vlad the First came from. But Vlad the Third was the first son of Vlad the Second. So that's where he gets Vlad the Third. And what about the Dracula name? Who's heard of Bram Stoker? Right? Mom. Mom. Come on. Oh, sorry. This is my mom up here. So there's not a lot of people in the audience, so I might reference to her. Sorry. I hope you all are here to have a good time because it's just going to be a fun, casual presentation. And so Bram Stoker wrote the story Dracula. So he really created vampires as we know them today. So, of course, there were always myths about blood sucking beings, but the idea of vampires and, like I said, Lord Dracula really came from Bram Stoker. And that idea originated from a castle in Transylvania and from stories about Vlad Dracul or Vlad Dracula. And where does that name come from? Well, Vlad the Second was actually Vlad Dracul, okay, because he was part of the Order of the Dragon. And this is a medal that was fashioned from a sketch of a design. They don't actually have any original medals left from the Order of the Dragon, but the Order of the Dragon was just a chivalric order that existed during the Crusades, and the people who were, or the countries that were a part of that chivalric order were Hungary, Poland, the Holy Roman Empire, Croatia, Slovakia, and Wallachia, Transylvania, Romania, and Moldavia. So a bunch of different middle kingdoms were part of the Order of the Dragon. So it was specific to those countries, and it was specific to those crusaders who fought against the Ottoman Empire. So that's where the Order of the Dragon comes from. It is literally just after the Latin word Draco, which means dragon, and so you have Dracul, Order of the Dragon, Vlad Dracul. So, because Vlad the Third was the son of the original Dracul, he was called Dracula. La meaning son of the dragon. So he would often be called Vlad Dracula, and he and his younger brother actually took the name Dracula as their last name because they didn't have a last name from their father. So that's where the name Dracula comes from. So Vlad the Third, Vlad Dracula, not because he's a bloodsucker, although there is some rumors about that, which I'll get to in a couple seconds. But It's because of dragons, not because of creepy vampires. Anyway, so then we have Vlad Tepes, which is another name that he is known for. And the word Tepes is actually a Romanian word for impaled. Okay. So it's also a Turkish and Persian word. And well, Tepes is the Romanian version of the Turkish and Persian word. And it means hillside or like on a summit. So um, you can see how he has this variety of names, which are all kind of slightly violent still, like dragons, they're kind of big, scary things. The Impaler, because he literally impaled people. And then he was also known as the Voivode of Wallachia, and he was also known as a Wallachian prince. But actual titles at this time in the 1400s in Wallachia specifically were a little. They weren't just handed out to anyone, but they also kind of were used for a lot of different administrative peoples. Wallachia didn't have a specific like monarchy like you would think of England, where you have Henry VII has Henry VIII, and Henry VIII has Edward VI, and on and on and on. For this, the voivodes were also, they were just really big deals with the military and the administration. So sometimes they were called princes, sometimes they were called voivodes. But Vlad II thought that because he was the son of Mercia, or Murcia, I'm not really sure how to pronounce that, but he thought that he had a claim to Wallachia because he thought his father was royalty, even though they didn't really have royalty. Again, I know this sounds a little convoluted, and that's because it was. So I just wanted to give you some background into the actual names of Vlad III. Or Vlad the Impaler, which is how I'll be referring to him. So Vlad the Impaler was a okay, so his dad, right? So he was a military leader, and he fought against the Ottomans. And because everybody was fighting against the Ottoman Empire. If you were Christian, Catholic Christian, which people in Europe were, then you were fighting against the Ottoman Turks because they were Muslim. So his father, Vlad II, was fighting against the Ottomans, and he and his two sons, one of them being Vlad III, were captured by the Ottomans, and only Vlad II was released. So his two sons had to stay imprisoned for a few more years with the Ottomans. So Vlad, this guy, he's kind of like he plays both sides. He plays for the Wallachians sometimes, and he plays for the Ottomans sometimes. It really just kind of depends on where the power is going. If he thinks he'll be successful with the Ottomans, then he's loyal to the Ottomans. If he thinks he's going to be successful in Wallachia, then he's going to be pro Wallachia, and he's going to fight for their side. But his ultimate goal is to be a well-known leader or a prince of Wallachia. So, even though he's kind of like fighting on both sides, he does eventually get the title of Prince of Wallachia. But then the Kingdom of Hungary actually invades Wallachia and captures him. And he is imprisoned for a few years, and then he gets out, and then he gets mad at Wallachia and starts fighting for the Ottomans. And then the Ottomans, he feels like they betray him, and he wants to be Prince of Wallachia again, and so he fights against them. And when he's fighting against the Ottomans, that's when he really starts to get into the whole impalement shtick. So I guess it's not really a shtick, but the whole impalement deal, like trying to just keep it light and fun, even though none of this is light and fun. But the impalements weren't, they are sadistic, but they weren't really forms of torture. They were just assigned to his enemies. Like, hey, if you come after me, this is what's going to happen to you. I tried to pick a sort of mild image here of impalement. But this is a 15th century wood carving from Germany. We got Vlad here dining in view of his impaled enemies here. So he's just kind of hanging out. He would also, as legend has it, dip his bread into the blood of his enemies before eating it. So, you know. that kind of goes with the whole Dracula thing, myths and legends, reputations. Again, I don't hear what you said, but now I want to know. Again, myths and legends here with these people, but this guy, he had a bad reputation, and I think he deserved that reputation because, like I said, literally impalement. Was he drinking blood? Probably not. Was he impaling people? Absolutely. So that is the tale of Vlad the Impaler. And as you'll see throughout this entire presentation, the reality of most of the people in this presentation was not as evil as their folklore and legends and people after them made them out to be. Of course, if you're going around and you're impaling people, word's going to spread and people are gonna talk about not only you impaling people, but like if you're that cruel, then you're probably drinking the blood of your enemies, right? And if you're not careful, according to some German folklore, if you don't come in after nightfall, then Vlad might steal you and like cut off your toes or something. That also might be Baba Yaga, but it's in the same reign. It's in the same reign. So this is actually a book from 15th century Germany, and it describes the tale of Vlad the Impaler, Vlad Dracul, and all of his evil and sadistic deeds. So this is kind of fairy tale folklore-esque, but it also gives some truth to Vlad the Impaler. So bad reputation, impaler, possible blood drinker. I'll let you guys decide. Okay. Again, this was just a viewpoint of what Europe's looking like pretty much during this whole presentation. This is what we got going on. We got England up here, some Ireland, Scotland, France is down here. We got Spain and Portugal, which I'm going to talk about with the Tudors. And then we're going to come back to Hungary and Romania, Wallachia, Transylvania, Moldavia at the end for Elizabeth of Bathory. Okay, so Anne Boleyn, England. Henry VIII's second queen. She, after her beheading and kind of during her later years, was known as a witch. That is her bad reputation. She was the demonized second wife of King Henry VIII. Now, I have her birth year as circa 1500. We definitely know she was beheaded in 1536, so she definitely died then, or maybe not, depends on what you want to believe, again, which is part of the thrill. And her birth records aren't very clear, so she might have been born in 1500, 1501, or 1507. So that's why I put circa 1500. All right, let's talk a little bit about her family. So the Boleyns. How many people know about Anne Boleyn? Heard about Anne Boleyn? No? Oh, you know of her? Oh, yes. I'm so excited for you. You're going to get to learn about Anne Boleyn. Oh, okay. So she's my favorite wife of King Henry VIII. So the Boleyns specifically, they were, so we have Thomas Boleyn, the patriarch, Elizabeth Howard, the matriarch. My spacing got a little bit off. Sorry, everybody. So we have Elizabeth Howard here, and then Mary Boleyn, who also slept with King Henry VIII. And then we have George Boleyn, their brother. And then this is a sketch of Anne, which does not look like what we would think of. I feel like a lot of people definitely picture dark hair, dark eyes, definitely got a witchy vibe happening here. Okay, so we have the family. They were very ambitious, and they were also Protestant, which is pretty strange for this era. So in the 1500s, you have Martin Luther nailing his 95 Thesis to a cathedral in Germany, and he's basically saying these are all the reasons why I don't like the Catholic Church. And so you have like little ideas and strands of Protestantism, and as the Catholics would call it, heresy, floating around Europe. And the Boleyns were kind of in on that. And Anne specifically really got into the idea of Protestantism and Protestant ideas while she was in France, because her dad, Thomas Boleyn, was the diplomat to France. And so he brought his family with him when he would go be in France doing his thing. And he actually left Anne there because she was supposed to be a maid of honor to King Henry VIII's sister, Mary Tudor. Lots of Marys, lots of Annes. So um, I hope you guys can keep up with me. I tried to label everybody. Mary Tudor, King Henry VIII's sister, was only Queen of France for a few years, and then her husband died. Did she murder him? Maybe. But that's another story for another time. And so Anne didn't go back with Mary. She actually stayed in France and was the maid of honor for Queen Claude, who was King Francis's wife after his dad, King Louis, died. Are we all good? We all still good? Cool. Okay. All right. Okay, so Anne's in France. She's hanging out, learning a bunch of different ways to be French. She speaks French. She learns philosophy. She learns how to dance. She's very coquettish, and she's kind of just really into the ways of the French court. And the English were a little more stodgy. They weren't as flirty as the French. And so when Anne came back, because she was supposed to marry someone and that marriage didn't work out, and she went to court, she was young and beautiful, and she dressed in the French fashion, and she flirted with everybody, and people were just, they took notice of her. And one person that really took notice of her was Henry VIII, because he was trying to annul his marriage to his first wife, Catherine of Aragon, because she couldn't have any male children. She had 10 pregnancies and only one child survived, Mary Tudor, who we'll talk about next. And Henry, he was looking around. Catherine was older than him. They weren't really sleeping together anymore after all of her failed pregnancies. And so he just, his eyes were wandering. And so before he hooked up with Anne, he actually hooked up with her sister, Mary. And that is the story of The Other Boleyn Girl by Philippa Gregory, which I do not recommend, but if you're into that kind of thing, it's probably... Anyway, I do not recommend, but, So the Boleyns were, like I said, they were very ambitious, right? So you had Mary sleeping with the king, you had Thomas Boleyn being a diplomat, and then getting a few other titles while Mary was the king's mistress. And then word spreads that Henry is trying to get rid of his first wife. So Anne kind of steps in and really starts going for it with the king, with the encouragement of her father and her family. So this over here is a 1903 portrait of Henry and Anne hunting together. So they were spending a lot of time together. They were together for about 6 years. They actually didn't get married until 1533. Anne supposedly refused to sleep with Henry, refused to give up anything until she knew she was going to be queen. She was very ambitious in her own right. She knew what she wanted, and she wasn't going to give it up before she knew that she would become Queen of England. And because she had already seen her sister fall, her sister got hooked up with some random guy after Henry didn't want her anymore, and Anne didn't want to live that life. She wanted to be Queen of England. And so there are many letters between Anne and Henry that survive, and they're very flirty, but historians believe that their marriage, that they did not consummate their relationship until right before their marriage, because we know that Anne was pregnant during her secret wedding ceremony, because that's one of the reasons why Henry married her. So Anne got pregnant. They had a secret marriage ceremony, and all during this time, while Anne and Henry are courting each other, well, he's courting Anne, really. Catherine is banished. Henry's trying to ignore her. He's trying to get their marriage annulled with the Pope in Rome, and the Pope says no, which I'll talk more about that with Mary Tudor, but the Pope says no, and Henry's like, okay, cool, I just want to do what I want, so I'm going to say no to the Catholic Church, I'm going to follow in Martin Luther's footsteps, and I'm going to become head of the Church of England. And so Henry establishes the Anglican Church, which is still, he is the head of the church as the monarch, and technically King Charles III, who is in England right now, is also head of the Anglican Church in England. So Anne and Henry. So Catherine is out of the picture. Henry's excommunicated, and Anne Boleyn is his wife. Now, people who were in England, like the public, they were really annoyed about this whole casual switch from Catholicism, which is, a very, very influential religion. Like everybody's Catholic at this point. Like I said before, that there are some ideas of Protestantism, but everybody was Catholic. Like you were Catholic, that's just what you were, that's how you lived, that's how things were going down. And so although some people supported the Boleyn's rise to power because they supported Protestantism, most of the country did not, and they didn't like that Henry was making them sign edicts saying that he was the head of the church. Who was he to tell them this? So a lot of people hated the Boleyns at the time, and they started spreading rumors about Anne. And after her death, she really became vilified. So, 1533, they get married. Protestantism rises. Henry's king and king of the church, I suppose. And Anne has her first child, which is a girl named Elizabeth, in 1533. And while it's a disappointment, because another girl, he already has Mary and now he has Elizabeth. Anna's still young. It's her first kid. She can have other children. It's fine. She's going to have a boy. It's cool. And so she miscarriages, also suffers from some false pregnancies within the next 2 years because she is freaking out that she's not having a boy for Henry because she saw what happened to the last wife. What's going to happen to her? There's no safety in this relationship. And so in 1536, she is pregnant, and Henry, who is in a jousting tournament, gets injured and he falls off his horse. And supposedly that injury scared Anne so much that she had the baby early or she miscarried. It kind of depends on who you read on what kind of words that they used. But it was determined that had the baby been delivered about 3 months later, it would have been a healthy boy. So things aren't looking good for Anne because she is very feisty. Again, like I said, she's ambitious. She's her own woman. She was already telling Henry what was what before they were even together. And now she hasn't produced a healthy male heir. So Henry's getting a little irritated with her. He's irritated with her family, who keeps asking for more and more and more from him. He is dealing with his country, who doesn't want to be Protestant. They want to be Catholic. He lost a few of his very good friends who were Catholic, Cardinal Wolsey, and Thomas More, who is a saint in the Catholic Church. They didn't want to admit that Henry was head of the church. They're super Catholic. And so his country is in a lot of turmoil in like the 3 years he's been married to Anne Boleyn. And he loses, like I said, he loses allies. He's excommunicated from the church. Like, he's got a lot going on. And there's just a really rough patch between the two of them because she can't produce an heir, and his eyes still a wandering. After her failed first pregnancy wasn't a failure because she had a healthy baby girl. But he decides that he's done with Anne, doesn't want to do this anymore, and he's already eyeing her lady in waiting, Jane Seymour. And so, because of this, he decides to make up some treasonous reasons why Anne should be beheaded, why she committed treason. Supposedly, she slept with 5 other men, including her brother, which is not true, or at least there is no evidence to support that idea. Only one of them, his name was Mark Smeaton, decided to go with the trial because they had a 2-day trial, and he was like, yes, I did it, I slept with her, I'm sorry, and he was still beheaded. So either way, people were going to get beheaded. So the 5 of them were beheaded, including her brother George, and Anne was also beheaded because Henry was just like, I'm done, you didn't give me what I want, so now I'm going to move on to the next one. And that is another story for another time. But if you have any questions, I'd be happy to share that story with you. So, Anne, like I said, beheaded. People didn't like her before, people didn't really like her during, and people did not like her after. Because if you look at Anne, specifically here in this portrait, and then if you also look at her in this supposedly contemporary portrait, you can see she has very light skin, she has very dark eyes. People described her as having black eyes, dark black hair, and also a 6th finger. So those sound like some pretty witchy descriptions to me. And it was because people didn't like her. And the wife that came after her was blonde hair, blue eyed, had a son, clearly perfection compared to the dark Anne Boleyn. So her reputation as a witch was pretty much unfounded. She was vilified because people didn't like what she was doing. There were no spells, there was no astrology. She did not have a sixth finger, because if she had so the rumor was she had a sixth finger, like a sixth pinky, that she would hide under very dark, long sleeves. And like I said, completely unfounded. If Henry saw that, she would have been gone immediately, because that's a sign of a demon and of a witch. So she would not have gotten with Henry VIII. But he did say later, after she died, that she must have put him under a spell, because how could he fall for her, because she was so terrible. So we have Vlad the Impaler, literally impaled people, bad reputation. And then we have Anne Boleyn, supposedly a witch, who is just trying to live her powerful lady life. Again, it's all up to you. You guys can decide what you think about these people. But I'm just sharing these stories. Also, cool thing, this is a monastery in England where Anne's heart is supposedly buried. That is a rumor. There is no proof, but thought I'd include that because it kind of goes along with the witchy vibe. Also, this was a real necklace that Anne wore. It was the B for Boleyn. It was a choker, a B for Boleyn with 3 pearls. So you'll often see her painted with that necklace. This is her her coat of arms for when she was queen. So you have the Tudor rose here and then a silver falcon. And then this is her signature when she was queen and the queen. So I think it's cool, so I share it. All right. So any questions so far? Yes. Because he was mad at her, pretty much. He didn't want, because her family was so ambitious and she was so ruthless as a person, at least, again, as the story goes, he didn't want to risk her gaining a separate power or coming back against him. So he decided to just kill her. Yeah. Both. Mhm. So I'm guessing I'm guessing a lot of the soldiers that he left or that he encountered on the battlefield were impaled alive. There is a story that he destroyed an entire village and just impaled literally everyone who was there. Women, children, babies, didn't matter. You were on the pike. And so I'm guessing it was both. I don't know for sure that it was both, but oh. Okay, so the question was, did Vlad impale people alive or dead? And based on what I know about Vlad the Impaler, I would say the answer is both. And then the other question was, why didn't he just divorce Anne like he did Catherine? And technically, he also didn't divorce Catherine. He kind of just made it up as he went along, because in the eyes of the Catholic Church, they were still married. The Pope, after he excommunicated Henry, he was like, I still think they're married, so good luck with that. When it comes to God and the final judgment. Okay, Queen Mary the First. Her reputation is as Bloody Mary, and this is definitely 100% true. She was born in 1560. Nope, these dates are totally wrong. Therefore, Elizabeth Bathory. So I forget what year she was born, but she died in 1558. She was a Catholic queen and murderer of Protestants. Okay, all right. Again, I don't know why my spacing's all weird. I'm sorry, everybody. It looked okay when I made the PowerPoint. But we're going to get into a little bit of the origin story of King Henry VIII. Okay, so Henry VIII, which we all are, I'm sure, hopefully are pretty familiar with. He had 6 wives. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. That is the little rhyme that people came up with to remember who they were. So you had Catherine of Aragon, and she was divorced. Then you had Anne Boleyn, who we just talked about, beheaded. Then you had Jane Seymour, who actually finally had a son, and she died a couple weeks later from complications from childbirth. And then he was with Catherine Howard, who was a cousin of Anne Boleyn, and she was beheaded because she actually slept with people who weren't the king. And then he was with Catherine Parr, who was another Protestant and really kind of helped bring the family of the Tudors back together during Henry's last years of life. So those are the wives of Henry VIII. But where did Henry come from, and who was his first wife? And who was his first daughter? That's what we're going to talk about next. So Henry VII married Elizabeth of York. And the marriage between these two ended what was called the Wars of the Roses, where they were a bunch of family civil wars between people who said that the House of York and the House of Tudor, or the House of Lancaster. It was really the House of Lancaster and York, and then Henry Tudor was part of the House of Lancaster. And they were just kind of going back and forth for a few decades during the 1400s, and then eventually Henry VII ended up winning the final battle, and he married, like I said, Elizabeth of York, bringing their two houses together. So the Tudor rose right here, as you can see, is a mix between the red rose of the House of Lancaster and the white rose of the House of York. So, the monarchy in England, when these two got together, was very fragile because they had just had decades of war, and they really wanted to keep their monarchy going and have some years of peace. So, you have Henry VII and Elizabeth of York, and they have Henry VIII, and then they also have their first son, who is often overlooked, and his name was Arthur, because Henry VII was obsessed with King Arthur. And so Arthur, the first son, was the one set to inherit the throne. And he was betrothed to Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife. So Catherine of Aragon is the daughter of Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile. So Aragon and Castile came together. They formed the country of Spain, and there were other little kingdoms in Spain that came together under their rule. But if Ferdinand and Isabella sound familiar to you, they were the monarchs who sent Christopher Columbus out on his first trip to the Americas, and they were also the monarchs of the Spanish Inquisition. So, super Catholic. Okay, that's what I really want to hone in on here with when it comes to Mary Tudor. Her family was very Catholic, and her effort to bring Catholicism back to England was very, very important to her. So, Arthur dies before, so Catherine is sent off to England to marry Arthur. They get married, supposedly do not consummate the marriage. And so after Arthur dies, a few months into their marriage, it is decided that instead of sending Catherine back to Spain, she would just marry the next in line to the throne, Arthur's younger brother, Henry. So after Henry VII dies, Henry VIII becomes king with his wife, Catherine of Aragon. They're living a happy little life. She, like I said before, has 10 pregnancies, and only one comes to fruition. Only one child survives, and that is Queen Mary I. A couple other things I want to talk about before we move on, though, because I think they're kind of cool. So you have the Tudor rose over here, and then over here you have the Tudor rose and the pomegranate, which was the symbol of Catherine of Aragon. And then this is a 15th century wood carving with Henry and the Tudor rose, and Catherine and the pomegranate. And I wanted to mention these things because the people of England and the monarchy really tried to establish Catherine of Aragon as a pure princess, did not sleep with her first husband. She was totally valid in the eyes of the church, and her marriage to Henry VIII was supposed to be, like, it was recognized by the church, and like I said, it was totally valid. So I just wanted to highlight that too. Okay, so the daughter that survives is Queen Mary I. And she marries. Okay, so I'm really, really sorry that all of my words are out of order here. But Queen Mary the First, she is growing up with a very Catholic family. England is Catholic. Her mother is Catholic. Her father is nicknamed the Defender of the Faith by the Pope. And then her mother can't have any more kids. And he decides to marry Anne Boleyn. And I'm not going to go back into that because we already talked about it. And so Henry marries Anne Boleyn. He decides to make England Protestant, and he tries to get Mary to sign a document that recognizes him as the head of the church, and she refuses. She holds on to her Catholicism for the rest of her life. It is very important to her, and she really hates Anne Boleyn. So under Anne Boleyn, Mary was stripped of her title as princess, and she was considered a bastard because Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon, was null and void in the new Church of England's eyes. So Mary's really struggling during her formative years because she loses her mother, doesn't get to see her mother after King Henry VIII marries Anne Boleyn. Catherine of Aragon dies, and Mary is just very unhappy having to take care of the new infant Queen Elizabeth, or Princess Elizabeth. So I feel like Henry's kind of rubbing her face in it a little bit. You know, like first he gets rid of her mother, and then Mary can't see her mother, and then Mary, in her teenage years, has to go take care of her new half sister, Elizabeth, and it's just a really bad time for Mary. And so after Henry dies, so he has Mary, then Elizabeth, and then Edward. Edward, of course, is going to become the King of England. He's King Edward VI, and he only makes it a couple years into his reign, and then he dies of yellow fever, and or just a fever. And so he actually changed the line of succession because under Henry, it was going to go Edward, Mary, Elizabeth. And then because the guy who was helping Edward out, John Dudley, the Duke of Northumberland, didn't want Mary to be queen because if, according to his new line of succession, if Edward died, his daughter-in-law and his son were going to be king and queen, Lady Jane Grey and Guilford Dudley. He wanted to change everything out of order, and he forced Edward to do this while he was sick. So Mary and Elizabeth were tossed aside in favor of the Duke of Northumberland, who I didn't put on here, and I should have put on here, and I'm sorry about that, in favor of his children. And so Mary was like, excuse me, we're not doing that. I am next in line. I'm going to be Queen of England. And so she gathers support from the people of England because she was actually still a popular princess, even though she was Catholic. And so she gathers support. She marches on London. John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, knows he can't take her on, so she becomes Queen of England. Now, this is a very, that's a very short story of a very long and arduous process. So, again, another story for another time. So Mary becomes Queen of England, and her number one goal as Queen of England is to get England back to Catholicism. Okay, and so that's why I really wanted to focus on her origin story, because it really explains what happens later in her life and why she becomes Bloody Mary. So she ultimately is queen. She kills Jane Grey, the 9-Day Queen, and her husband Guilford Dudley in order to show that she is in charge, she has the power, and she's going to do what she wants. Unfortunately, her reign does not last very long. It's only from 1553 to 1558, and she makes a few mistakes during her reign that really set up her reputation. First mistake, marrying a foreigner. She marries King Philip II of Spain. He is her distant cousin, but she really loves Spain, and she really loved her mother, and that had a huge influence on her. So she decides to marry Philip II of Spain. The English Parliament and everybody in England is mad that he is not English, so that's a big problem. The second thing she does is she loses Calais, which is this very small part of France that England owned, and that was a huge deal for the English monarchy. Again, another story for another time, but some early kings of England thought that they owned France and were also kings of France, and that led to the 100 Years' War. And so eventually, after the Hundred Years' War, the English monarchy started losing bits and bits of England, even though they really wanted to take it back. So England only has this tiny little portion of France called Calais, and Mary loses it during her reign. So first strike, foreign prince. Second strike, loss of territory in France. Third strike, biggest strike of her reputation, is trying to revert England back to Catholicism. So she recruits her friend, Cardinal Reginald Pole, to come be the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is one of the biggest roles in the religious sector in England. And she also, in her effort to revert England back to Catholicism, passes a slew of laws and basically, if you do not revert back to Catholicism and if you practice your Protestant religion, you're going to be burned at the stake. So, under Mary's rule, over 200 people, Protestants, were burned. Um, and that's just the ones that we know of, the ones that they were keeping track of, like officially by the government. And you can learn all about it and its brutality in the Book of Martyrs by John Fox. Now, John Fox was super bitter about the death of Protestants. And I mean, who wouldn't be, like, if you're persecuted specifically for your religion? And he was a Protestant from Scotland, and he did not like Mary. They actually met a few times, and they were not cordial with each other. But he was very angry about her new rules and her persecution of Protestants in England. And so he wrote a pretty damning section of his book, Acts and Monuments of the Christian Church. He wrote the Book of Martyrs, which details how these people were murdered under Mary's reign. So Mary is known as Bloody Mary because of the amount of people that died during her reign when she was trying to revert England back to Catholicism. So, I mean, 200 people in 5 years. Pretty solid reputation for Bloody Mary. But the thing that I think gets so misconstrued about Mary, I think Mary is fascinating personally, is people just, and like we do with a lot of people, we forget the origin and the context of certain actions. It's not a justification by any means. I just want to be clear. It is terrible that she committed what I personally, in my opinion, will call a genocide. Because, just because you're this different religion, we're going to try and get rid of all of you and kill you all. You either convert or you die. Just a terrible way to rule. Questions? All right, Elizabeth Bathory. We're going to say goodbye to England and we're going to go back to Hungary. So, the Blood Countess. She was alive from 1560 to 1614. So something else that happened in the 1600s were the Salem witch trials, right? Yeah. Oh my gosh. I briefly was like, oh my God, was that the 1700s? No, it was the 1600s. Okay. Sometimes the history is just not all dates, you guys, because sometimes they get a little jumbled up. So, Blood Countess, Elizabeth Bathory. Was she a sinister bather in blood or a sensationalized powerful widow? Let's talk about it. So, Elizabeth Bathory, she was the daughter of Baron George VI and Anna Bathory. Her uncle was Stephen Bathory, a king of Poland, and also before that, he was also a voivode of Wallachia, if you remember back to our pal Vlad. But he ultimately became the king of Poland. And then there was also Andrew Bathory, who was a cardinal of Warmia and also a voivode of Wallachia. So you got all these people, powerful positions. So she came from a really powerful family. Again, a powerful woman in her own right. This is an image of the coat of arms, of a modern image of the Bathory family. Okay, a little bit about Elizabeth Bathory. So she was born in 1560 to her own powerful family in Hungary, and then she eventually married at the age of 15 this guy right here, Count Ferenc II, and they lived in this castle that I will be honest with you, I cannot pronounce, and I did not find a pronunciation that made sense to me, so it is a castle in what is now Slovakia. And this is a rendition of what it would have looked like during her time, and this is what it looks like now. You can go visit it, and it has some interesting things inside. But this is supposedly the castle where she committed all of her crimes. Elizabeth and her husband Ferenz had 8 children. 5 of them lived to adulthood. And by the time she was committing the blood atrocities, her kids were all out of the house. They were living their own life, doing their own thing, and her husband had actually died. So she was in charge of the castle and the 17 villages that surrounded the castle and all of the count's lands, because he was often in the east fighting none other than the Ottomans, because everybody's fighting the Ottomans. So it continues. It continues. And so eventually he dies and she is left alone at the castle, and supposedly she would welcome in young women from around the village and from other nobles. And once they were in the castle, it was just complete torture for them. This is how the legend goes. And supposedly, all of these women were killed. They were tortured and then they were killed. And then she would bathe in their blood or create powders with their blood. Or basically, the thing about the blood was she thought if she put virginal blood on her body or soaked in it, then she would, have a youthful look. She wouldn't grow old, and kind of was looking for that youthful look and immortality. So, a lot of girls did die in this castle, and people looked into it. There was a guy from Poland. He was a Palatine. His name was George Thurzo, and he was supposedly sent to look into all of these allegations of Elizabeth. And they did find dead bodies of young women in this castle. But how did they die, right? We're not really sure. There is an author. Her name is Dana Schwartz, and she also does, I think it's her, she does the podcast Noble Blood. 10 out of 10 would recommend. And she thinks that what really happened in the castle was, it's the 1500s. There's a lot of disease going around. Well, actually, it's the 1600s now because her husband died in 1610. That there's a lot of disease going around, and a lot of these girls actually died from disease or, something that was more common than being, stabbed to death and their blood used for Elizabeth. So, but the reason why they thought she did all these terrible things to these girls is because there was supposedly evidence of bloodletting and needles under the girls' fingernails. Now, they don't know if these things happened to them after they were dead. They don't know if they happened to them while they were alive. But one thing that Dana Schwartz suggests is that if it happened when they were alive, these were common medical practices. Putting needles under fingernails and bloodletting were things that they would do to help relieve symptoms of pretty much any illness, right? So bloodletting, you had leeches, and you're just going to let out a little bit of the bad blood so that you can heal with all the good blood inside of you. And so, because it was a really powerful woman who had a bunch of land and a bunch of money, well, you have these girls, though, and we want your land. So, clearly, you tortured these girls and you just want to live forever. So, we're going to say that you did all these terrible things, and then we're going to imprison you and take all your stuff from you. So, she had no protection. Again, her husband had died. It was just her against other nobles who wanted her stuff, basically. And unfortunately, evidence did exist, but again, we don't know the origins of the evidence. But when you put it into historical context, you see, again, it could have been a medical reason for what had happened to these girls, or, maybe she did drink their blood. We're not really sure. I'm going to guess that it was a medical thing. But again, that's why context is super important, especially for history, because these terrible things happen, and, usually there's a reason for why they happen. And then you can kind of decide, with other folklore and stories, well, maybe it was actually this other thing. But I really believe in historical context, and I think it's very important to understand the origins and the reality of certain situations, which is why I wanted to have this presentation. So just a friendly reminder of what it all looked like in the areas where she was. We have Hungary here, Wallachia here. She was kind of over here with her location with the castle, and her story is very similar to that of Vlad the Impaler with the whole blood drinking thing. It is rumored that Bram Stoker was also inspired by Elizabeth Bathory, but there is no evidence for that within his notes or anything that Stoker, um, excuse me, anything that he said or wrote. So that is something that is not true. And that's how it ends. So even up to 1614, Elizabeth Bathory dies trapped in her own castle. So they just, they lock her up. They wall up all the windows. They wall up all the walls. And she just eventually dies from lack of everything, really. So that was her punishment. And then the nobles that did accuse her did disperse her lands and they took her money. So, yeah. I again forgot to bring my books down with me, and I'm so sorry. I can go grab them if you guys just want to hold on for a second. That concludes the presentation, though, with Vlad and Mary and Anne and Elizabeth. So, are there any questions? I threw a lot at you, lots of names. Sorry, everybody has the same name, except for Vlad. But yes, yeah. Oh, that's a really good question. And impalement wasn't completely unknown for war at the time, but I cannot confirm if he. Like, I want to say that he probably did learn it from the Ottomans, but I can't remember if I'm remembering that because I read it from like a historian or if because it's in a movie called Dracula Untold, which is a completely fictional. So she asked if Vlad had come up with the kind of impalement on his own, if that was his personal thing, or if he might have learned it from somewhere. And to be honest, I cannot confirm, but I would not be surprised. Anyone else? No? Oh, yes. Yeah. Yes. 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 Oh, okay. So Vlad. Okay, so she asked Bram Stoker, who wrote the book Dracula, which was inspired by Vlad the Impaler. It is not historically accurate at all. It's completely made up. It's just there was this guy who was really evil in Wallachia, which was similar to Transylvania. So I would say that no, none of it would be. Where's the map? Okay, yeah, see, so in here, which is where Wallachia is, it's really close to Transylvania. He was also inspired by a castle in Transylvania. So just the idea of someone drinking blood, you know, and like Vlad the Impaler was a specific guy who was very evil. And there was, I, yeah, all I know is that he was the inspiration, was part of the inspiration, but I don't think it was like a retelling of Vlad's life, if that's what you mean. Yeah. Yeah, so it was not. No. So Dracula is completely made up by Bram Stoker. So, um, I will say though, like I said, if you guys just want to wait here for a second, I'll go grab the things that were inspired. I have some movies and I have some books, fiction and nonfiction. So if you don't mind just chilling out for a second, I'll go grab that, and then I'll be right back. Thank you all so much for coming. I love talking about this stuff, and it just made me really happy to be able to share it with you guys. So thank you so much.